Hello, good morning. This is our uh, first lecture for week 4 of our course BPSC 031 Spring Wildflowers. Uh, the lecture corresponds to Monday, April the 20th, year 2020. This week, the whole week, we will talk about a group of plant families that we have called, just to give them a grouping name, the five-parted families. The five-parted families are basically the plants in the California flora and the California wildflowers, the most common 5 families that produce plants, especially in spring wildflowers, that are noticeable in the wildernesses around Southern California, both in the desert and in the chaparral and in the mountains. They're called the five-parted families because they have 5 petals. And they're easy to identify, plants with 5 petals fused into a corolla. Their petals are fused together, so the corolla is, to use the terminology that we learned in class, sympatalous. It's a sympatalous corolla. All the petals are fused into one corolla. Let me share the screen into the PowerPoint slides, and we'll talk a little bit about this family. The five-parted, these families, it's 5 of them. The five-parted families are the most common 5-petal families in the California wildflowers flora are the Solanaceae, or the potato family, the Hydrophyllaceae, also known as the waterleaf family, the Boraginaceae, known as the borage family, the Lamiaceae, known as the mint family, and the Scrophulariaceae, known commonly as the snapdragon family. They're all 5-petal plants, very common in the California flora of spring wildflowers. If you walk around the mountains around campus, the places we normally go when we have no health restrictions that, like unfortunately we have this year, the Santa Rosa Plateau, the San Bernardino Mountains, Swarthout Canyon, you will see them all over the place. The main, most distinctive trait is a corolla with fused petals, a sympatalous corolla. 5 petals, and that can divide it into 2 groups within the 5 families. 2 of these families have zygomorphic corollas, while the other 3 of these plant families have actinomorphic or radiate corollas. And then, as we'll see later, the presence of helicoid inflorescences is also a very distinctive trait. As a matter of fact, we can put the 3 families into a taxonomic key, and this is going to be your first immersion into the concept of a taxonomic key. A taxonomic key is a tool that botanists have used to allow themselves and allow other people identify plants in the field or collected in the wild by asking a few simple questions. And the first simple question in these plants is the presence of zygomorphic flowers as opposed to radiate or actinomorphic flowers. So if you see a plant with 5 fused petals in the field, a member obviously of the 5-parted families, your first question, question number A, is, are the flowers actinomorphic or radiate, or are the flowers strongly zygomorphic and 2-lipped? They have the petals separated into an upper lip and a lower lip. If they are never 2-lipped, if they are actinomorphic, we go to option B. If they are zygomorphic, we go to option D. And I'll show you in a second what the options are. So, assuming that our plant is is actinomorphic, sorry about that. The second question we would ask ourselves is, if the plant with radiate flowers, simple radiate flowers, has often foul-smelling leaves. It's a distinctive trait of this family, with petals fused into a trumpet-shaped or a saucer-shaped structure, with or sometimes tubular flowers, and a very interesting and easy character to see with pleated petals. The petals, before they open, they're pleated, they're folded on top of each other, pretty much like a Scottish quilt. And the fruit, a berry or a many-seeded capsule. So if it's plants that normally don't smell too nice, the seeds don't smell too nice, and the flowers are tubular or trumpet-shaped with pleated petals, the petals are folded on each other, then it belongs to the tomato family, the Solanaceae. On the other hand, if the plants are herbaceous, mostly herbaceous, with inflorescence arranged in a helicoid sign, then you have to go to option C. It can be more than one family. So if we go to option C, we have two questions that will allow us to key out the two families that have helicoid signs. If the plants have sticky epidermal hairs, if you touch the epidermis, the skin of the plant, and it feels like sticky, it has glandular epidermal hairs, and you get that like a sticky feeling, a mucilage in your fingers. And the flower has a forked style. The style of the flower is divided into two, like a fork. And a multi-seeded ovary that yields fruit, that yields a capsule as a final fruit. Then it belongs in the water leaf family, the Hydrophyllaceae. And you can very easily relate the sticky nature of the leaves, the epidermal hairs, with the name Hydrophyllaceae. Hydra meaning watery, and phyllum meaning leaves, the plants with watery leaves. That's why it's called also the water leaf family. On the other hand, if the epidermis of a plant is bristles, is formed by bristly hairs, the plants are mostly herbaceous, with a single style, not with a fork style. And the fruit is, if they have a four-lobed ovary yielding 4 nutlets, then the plant belongs in the family Boraginaceae. Now, let us go back up here, and you remember the first question, question A, was if the flowers are radiate, never two-lipped, or strongly zygomorphic. So what happens if the flowers are strongly zygomorphic? Well, we go to the next option, which is option D, and there are two questions that we can ask ourselves. Are the plants fragrant, aromatic? Do they smell nice? And the leaves are opposite, and the stems are square, and the flowers, very often arranged in spikes, produce 4-lobed ovaries with 4 nutlets, pretty much like the Boraginaceae that also produces 4 nutlets. Then that is a mint family, the Lamiaceae. On the other hand, if there are herbaceous aromatic plants with zygomorphic tulip flowers, pretty much like the previous option, but 2 chambered capsules containing many, many small seeds. So the fruit is a capsule. And of course, the plants do not have fragrant aromatic leaves. And if they don't have opposite leaves, and if they don't have square stems, please note that zygomorphic flowers, aromatic plants that smell nice, and square stems are the trait of the mint family. If they don't have those traits, but they have zygomorphic tulip flowers, and if the fruit is a capsule containing many small seeds, then the family is the Scrophulariaceae. Okay, here up to now what we have done is see a taxonomic key. This is, I hope, still a gentle introduction to taxonomic keys. If you check floras, if you become in your life and interested in wildflowers, doesn't matter if it's a professional interest or an amateur interest. If you are just interested in botanizing and watching nature on weekends or on holidays or things like that. If you buy a flora, they will often, the manuals with plants will often have these type of keys that if you follow them closely, they will allow you to identify anything you see in the field. So taxonomic keys are a tool that taxonomists use to identify plants in the field. And this is a very simple taxonomic key for plants in the five-parted families in the California flora. So now we'll start with the nightshade family, the Solanaceae, also known as the tomato family. The Solanaceae are normally plants with foul-smelling, alternate leaves, saucer, trumpet, or tubular flowers with pleated petals. Fruit mostly a fleshy berry, sometimes a many-seeded capsule. We'll check later the flower morphology of the Solanaceae. It's very, very identifiable and easy to identify, especially the trait of the pleated petals. We'll see it in a second in some images and drawings. The vegetative morphology is annuals, herbaceous plants or small shrubs with simple alternate leaves and very often foul-smelling. Most of the plants in the Solanaceae, as we will see in a few minutes, are foul-smelling. They contain toxics that they use to deter herbivores from eating the plants. The reproductive morphology, the flowers are usually showy with saucer or funnel shaped, sometimes tubular corollas, and in varied arrangements. The sepals are 5, partly fused. The petals are 5, mostly fused and pleated in the bud. This is very important, pleated petals. 5 stamens joined to the petals. Anthers commonly connivent. The anthers connivent means joined to each other, sort of touching each other, forming a circle. With a poricite dehiscence, and I'll show you in a second. Remember the word dehiscence, the way things open, a fruit can dehisce, a capsule can dehisce. Well, the anthers also dehisce, and poricite dehiscence means that they open on top. They have a little pore on top, and they act almost as a blower. They when they're shaken by the wind or something, they will eject pollen by an aperture on top of the anther. The flower has a superior ovary with 2 chambers, and the fruits, because of that, are normally berries or capsules with 2 carpels. There are only 2 carpels in the ovary, and you will see an exception of that in tomatoes. Tomatoes are the fruits of Solanum lycopersicum, a very important plant in the family, but they normally have been selected for large fruits, and so mutants that are uncommon in the wild are the ones that predominate under cultivation with 3, 4, or more carpels forming the fruit. This is the typical flower of the Solanaceae in the genus Solanum. This is Solanum cicimbrifolium, and you can see here a number of things that I will show with a mouse. First of all, you can see the corolla, the petals are fused. Here you can see the calyx, the sepals are also partially fused, so they only separate 3/4 of their way. And you might see it here or in this one. This is not the best image, we'll see others. The petals are pleated. You can see here they're folded in the middle when in the bud, and then as they open, they unpleat. They're folded against each other. A very, very important trait that allows us to identify the family. If you look at the anthers, you see the anthers look a little bit like bellows. They are like tubes full of pollen that do not open lengthwise like most anthers do, but they open on top. They have a pore on top. So when an insect comes in, normally when coming in, this is a stigma. The insect will touch a stigma with pollen from another flower, go in and get the nectar. And when they come out from the base of the plant where the nectaries, the nectar producing glands are, they will compress the anthers in doing so. And the anthers, when they're compressed, they will act, I was saying, as a sac, as a bellows, and expel out a cloud of pollen that the insect will meet as it comes out. So they have a really interesting pollination system with poricidal dehiscence of the anthers. This is an illustration, and again, I have added this to your lab manual, an illustration, somewhat clumsy illustration, I did it myself, but I hope it demonstrates what the point I want to make. Again, for each family, you will see that I have uploaded one paragraph, which is the family at a glance, the Solanaceae at a glance. You're in the field and you want to know if a plant belongs to the Solanaceae. Well, foul-smelling plants with alternate leaves, pleated, also known as plicket, petals in the opening flower bud. You can see the illustration here, a flower bud opening with plicket petals. Connivent anthers, the anthers are together forming a row of anthers around the stigma and the style, with poricidal dehiscence, they open on top. The ovary is superior, you can see in the illustration here, with two carpels. You can see here a cross-section of the fruit with two carpels and many ovules with axial placentation. The fruit is a two-carpel berry or a capsule. Sometimes if it dries, it's a capsule. It's also a two-carpel capsule. If it stays fleshy, is a two-carpel berry. This is an illustration taken by the model I used to make the illustration is Solanum parrishi, the purple nightshade. You can see here some illustrations. The tomato plant, as opposed to most of the plants in the genus Solanum that have purple petals, the tomato has yellow petals in the flower. And you can see the fruit, of course, a berry, the plicket corolla, the stigma with poricidal dehiscence. You can see again an inflorescence. The inflorescence, if they do form inflorescences, they're normally a raceme. And you can see here the whole sequence of the flowers from pollination to formation of the berry that eventually, many of the berries in the Solanaceae, when they ripen, they change color and set out a warning indication or an advertisement indication to fruit dispersers. The cross-section of a fruit will reveal, at least in the wild plants, two carpels. Under cultivation, you can have more than two with axial placentation. Important plants in the family. There are a number of very important plants in the family. Some of them of huge importance for feeding humanity, as a matter of fact. One of them is the potato, Solanum tuberosum. You can see here again the typical flower of the Solanaceae, the plicket petals, the connivant anthers with poricidal dehiscence. In the potato, the petals are normally light purple. Remember, I told you the most common color of petals in the genus Solanum is purple. And of course, what we eat in the genus Solanum is the underground tuber, which is a transformed stem. And it's like a rhizome that has gone fat, full of nice starch and nutrients. Most of the cultivated Solanaceae for food come from the New World, but there are a few exceptions. There are almost no food-bearing Solanaceae that are native to Europe, which is really interesting because the Europeans eat potatoes and tomatoes in huge amounts, but none of them are native to Europe. Until 5 centuries ago, they were largely unknown in Europe. But in Asia, as a matter of fact, farmers have domesticated Solanum melongena, which is the eggplant. There's a lot of variation in colors. There are white eggplants, there are variegated eggplants, green eggplants, and the most common one, which is the large, sort of deep violet eggplant that we consume in markets in the United States. Although the longer Japanese eggplants, if you like cooking or food, they're delicious. They're sweeter than the large eggplant, but we can talk about that some other time. The flower is very similar to the flower of the potato. As a matter of fact, if I showed you the flower alone without showing you the fruit of the plant, you wouldn't be able to distinguish the species very well. They're so similar. Apart from the tomato, the potato, and the eggplant, there's also, from the New World, the tomatillo. This is not in the genus Solanus, it's in the genus Physalis, which has, all the plants in the genus Physalis have a really interesting trait, which is once the ovary becomes pollinated and starts forming the fruit, the calyx keeps on growing and surrounds the fruit almost entirely. The calyx grows with the fruit. It's a form of protection in the wild until the fruit is ripe for dispersal. The petals fall, but the calyx remains. So all these Solanaceae with an overgrown calyx, you can very rapidly recognize because they belong in the genus Physalis. Most of the plants in the genus Physalis are toxic. Physalis ixocarpa, which is from central Mexico and Central America, southern Mexico and Central America, what anthropology is known as Mesoamerica. This one has been domesticated to make it edible and to make it nice to eat. This is the base of all the green salsas from Mexico and Central America. It's really nice to eat. There are other Physalis that we cultivate in gardens just because they're so nice. You can see in this one known as the Chinese lantern, which is an Asian plant, by the way. The name Chinese, I don't know if it is because the color of the fruit and the pendulous nature of the fruit might resemble physically Chinese lanterns, or because the plant is Asian, or both. Physalis alkekenji is a very nice ornamental plant, and you can see the role that the bracts of the calyx play. The sepal, the bracts and the sepal, or the sepals, sorry, in plural. The sepals are bracts. Become red as the plant ripens. And in the wild, that is what attracts fruit dispersers. It's not the fruit itself, which is pretty non-ambiguous, non-showy, but the calyx itself. And now here we come one of my most favorite plants in the family, Solanaceae, the chili, Capsicum annum. There are 5 species of cultivated chilies. There is Capsicum annum, the most common chili, and then there is habanero peppers from the Caribbean. There is the Malagueta peppers from the Atlantic. We're going to see those in a second, and 2 species from the Andes, ají and rocoto. It's really interesting. The natural history of chiles is amazingly interesting. We're going to see it in more detail at the end of this talk, or perhaps on the Wednesday. In Europe, interesting enough, most of the plants in the family Solanaceae are highly toxic, and none of them has been domesticated as a food plant. One of the common plants in Europe, wild plant, is the belladonna, or deadly nightshade. For those of you familiar with the Italian language, belladonna means pretty woman or pretty lady. And the reason why this plant, Atropa belladonna, the deadly nightshade, received that name is because during the Renaissance, Italian girls and young women in the court of Florence, Milano, and Venice, in the principates, in the kingdoms of northern Italy, before Italy was unified into one single country, they would cut the plant in the wild and put the tip of a cut stem into their eyes, in the lacrimal, in the corner of the eye, and then press the stem to allow the juice, which is extremely toxic, to get into their eyes. And one of the things that Atropa belladonna does, the first sign of toxicity, is to paralyze the movement of non-voluntary muscles, what we know as smooth muscles. And so if you put it in your eye, what it will do, it will paralyze temporarily the movement of a pupil, and your pupil will dilate to a huge size, and your eye will look black with a dilated pupil. There was this idea in the Renaissance that women that did that looked really pretty, that it used to make them very, very pretty. So it was the juice of the deadly nightshade was a very common element in the toiletry of young women before a ball or a party. What does that is a set of alkaloids. Alkaloids are secondary compounds produced by the plant. That is, compounds that have purposes different to that of proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids, fats, and oils. The tropine alkaloids slow the smooth muscle action. And now we use them, as a matter of fact. First of all, every time you go to an optician or an optometrist and they dilate your pupil to eye inside, to see your eye inside, they use atropine, which is the active substance from Atropa belladonna. In more regular concentrations and if administered daily, it is also used to treat arrhythmic heart irregularities, to treat people that have heart arrhythmias or problems with the regularity of their heart beating, which is an indication of a propensity for heart attack, of irregular functioning of the heart. So it has medical use, but it has to be used under medical supervision because it's highly, highly toxic. Another plant, European plant in the family Solanaceae, is the mandrake, Mandragora officinarum. And of course, those of you and all my students belong to this generation known as the millennials, who grew up reading and following Harry Potter. You might remember all the things that mandrakes do and are reputed to do for witchcraft. As a matter of fact, the reason why it's is reputed for witchcraft is for it has two reasons why it's the lore attributes it to being heavily used by witches. One is, if you remove the plant from the ground, the pivot type of root, the central root, very often divides, as shown here in this example, into 1, 2, or 3 pivots. It very easily subdivides into pivots. And if you look at the pivots, once you get them from the ground and you wash them, which are sort of pinky brownish in color, they might resemble, with somewhat of a sick imagination, the limbs of human beings, of little petite human beings underground. So the appearance of the roots looking like human beings, and the fact that it's highly poisonous, made it, I don't know, quite frankly, if it was a central element in witchcraft and black magic, or the popular lore attributed to witches and black magic, and it's simply a highly toxic plant that grows in Europe. I tend to sympathize with the second hypothesis, but I leave that for your own research. Another highly toxic plant, this one from the New World, is the tobacco, Nicotiana tobacco. The tobacco plant has an alkaloid known as nicotine. And nicotine is deadly for insects that dare eat the plant. If you look, most of the plants in the family Solanaceae have no spines. They have no defense. They look pretty much defenseless. They have green leaves, very often herbaceous leaves, no defenses. You can see again that in this case a tubular flower with the pleated petals. You can see again the pleated petals. The flower is not saucer shaped or trumpet shaped like in the ones that we saw previously, but really tubular. And the thing is that it contains nicotine that is deadly for insects. In Mexico City, where I grew up as a young researcher and developed my professional career, I used to buy from providers of organic gardening the remaining of tobacco leaves from the cigar industry in Veracruz. They would sell me bags of tobacco shavings and broken leaves. And if you boil that in water, it makes a fairly disgusting brown liquid. And you apply that with a spray to your plants. If they have aphids or any type of insect in the plants, it will kill them readily. Uh, it's a really good way of getting rid of insects with something that is organic and not a synthetic chemical, and is eventually disappears in the environment. It degrades, it self-degrades into the environment. It's perfectly degradable. Anyway, tobacco is very, very important. There's a huge industry around the tobacco leaves used for smoking. Fortunately, in the United States and in many parts of the world, the industry is dwindling down. And I say fortunately because it is proven beyond any doubt that incorporating tobacco smoke into your lungs or your respiratory tract is a major cause of cancer. It can shorten the life expectancy of a country by many, many years. It's deadly. I love personally tobacco in the wild. I love the smell of fermented tobacco leaves, and I can understand why some people love smoking tobacco leaves, but it is really a highly toxic plant. In the Solanaceae, there are also a number of ornamentals, like the angel's trumpet, Brugmansias. You will see them all over California. They're related to a plant here in California, the Datura wrightii, known as gypsum weed, which is also toxic and hallucinogenic. The cultivated petunias are also in the family. These are the nice guys within the tobacco family. And you will see in the chapter I uploaded, especially because now we are in the middle of a coronavirus emergency. So in order to make the reading more fun and try to stimulate you to think about ideas, I'm incorporating in some chapters, not all, but in many, a section called Darwin in the Kitchen, which is about observations that you can make at home on the different plants that we are seeing. So you will read, I won't read it all to you because I already mentioned that, but you will see it in your lecture notes. And I really ask you to give it a quick read, which is a summary of all the different toxics that plants in the Solanaceae have. It's a nasty family. It really is a family where all plants are toxic in one way or other, including our friends, the tomato, the eggplant, and the potato, that contain a substance called solanine, which can be extremely toxic. I don't know if you ever wondered, why do we eat potato, why do we eat tomatoes, for example, and the fruit, and we don't eat a tomato salad? In many plants, we eat both the fruit and the leaves. Even in avocados, the avocado leaves are really nice in some traditional cuisine of different parts of the world, including Mexican cuisine. But you will never be offered a tomato leaf salad or boiled tomato leaves in soup or something like that, because they contain solanine that is really, really toxic. The tobacco plant, an associated plant, the genus Nicotiana, contains nicotine. Chili peppers contain a really interesting substance, capsaicin. And capsaicin is not really toxic, but it feels like you're dying if you eat too much. Potatoes contain solanine also, like tomatoes. And wild potatoes, which are still harvested in the Andes by women in Peru and Bolivia, they normally harvest the wild potatoes and put them in the mountains as high as they can for a while to dry out and suffer below freezing temperatures during a month or two. And these dried potatoes, once you boil them, after they have been dried, first of all, once they're dry, you can take them to the field or to different camps, and they will last because they're dry. And once you boil them, the solanine is gone. But wild potatoes, if you collect them in the Andes, the ancestors of our cultivated potatoes that we used to make fries and potato chips and mashed potatoes and so many things, the ancestors can be really toxic for a very simple reason. A plant that stores nutrients underground in the form of starch, of very nice, nutritious, tuberous starch, can be a major object for predators, for insects, or for burrowing animals that will try to get them. So they're loaded with solanine so as to deter animals from eating. Potatoes were supposed to be so toxic initially, and because Europeans had an association that plants in the Solanaceae were toxic in general, like belladonna or like mandrake, that potatoes initially in Europe were eaten by the poorest of the poor, by the very poor people. This is a picture by Van Gogh, The Potato Eaters, that shows the poorest people in Europe lived from potatoes, but the aristocracy wouldn't initially touch the potatoes. And of course, you all know the story of the famine in Ireland. The Irish farmers that were working for the English landlords were forced to work, and their only means of food in the work to produce especially linseed and linseed oil and fibers from the flax plant that produces linseed. While producing fibers for the mills in England, for the weaving industry, they were basically eating potatoes. And a disease attacked the potatoes in Ireland in the 18th century, the potato blight, and sorry, in the 19th century, the potato blight, and almost 3 million Irish farmers died, and it forced an immigration to other parts of the world, especially to the United States, part of South America, part to Australia and New Zealand, where you see the Irish diaspora. Since in the potato blight, you have the reason why do we celebrate so fervently St. Patrick's Day in the United States. Now, and I'll stop with this, chilies. The story of chilies is quite interesting. Wild chilies, if you see chilies in the wild, non-cultivated chilies, the fruit is always standing upright. And it's green, it's not very visible until it's perfectly ripe. The seeds are ready for dispersal, and then it turns red. So these are wild chilies. Cultivated chilies, of course, have been selected for centuries by farmers in different parts of the world, and they're really large, like the peppers, and they may vary a lot in the percentage content of capsaicin from quote unquote sweet peppers that don't actually are not very spicy, don't burn very much, to actually some fiery peppers that are incredibly burning. But the reason is, you might ask, why would a plant in the wild that has fruits that become red and attractive for animals, obviously depending on animals for seed dispersal, why would it develop capsaicin, which is a substance that if you try the fruit in the wild will make your mouth burn? So much so that we human beings have learned to mix chilies with other stuff and use it as a condiment, but we never eat, or we rarely eat, chilies as a whole food, right? Especially chilies that have the capsaicin content of wild chilies. Well, the story has to do with little birds in the class Passeriformes, the little passerine birds, the typical little brown birds. This is a thrasher in a forest in Bolivia that eat the fruit. The birds eat the fruit, but birds don't have saliva and don't chew. Birds eat things entire, and they don't have much of a taste of feeling, especially passerine birds, in their mouth, because they have an inner stomach that is muscular, has muscle, is muscular, and where they will actually break the food apart. So birds, quote unquote, chew with their stomach. They don't chew with their mouth. And in the stomach, they don't have much of a sense of taste. And so they can actually eat things with a lot of capsaicin and without caring too much. And the chili peppers are really nice and nutritious. They're especially rich in vitamins, rich in all sorts of element and of basic vitamins, nutrients, carbohydrates, you name them, high in protein. The seed is very tough and will go through the digestive tract of the bird and eventually be defecated. But because birds fly for so long, compared to smaller animals, they are incredibly good seed dispersers for wild chilies. As opposed to small rodents, that if they eat a fruit, first of all, because they're nibblers or smaller animals in general, they either nibble with their incisive teeth or masticate with their molars, they will basically kill the seed through the process of nibbling or mastication. Birds, because they swallow the fruit entire, they will not kill the seed. And secondly, birds move much larger, greater distances than small rodents, or much less than small lizards. So they're incredibly effective seed disperser. So basically, in the wild, chilies are actually adapted for birds because they obtain an amazingly good dispersal. So much so that wild chilies range from central United States, and some of them even reach to Canada, all along the American tropics to northern Patagonia. They cover most of the American continent. They're really widely distributed in almost every ecosystem in Central and South America and in North America. They're very cosmopolitan. They grow very easily, and they have achieved an immense resilience in their life form and distribution thanks to the consumption by birds. And you can see here the empty receptacles where the calyx used to be and the flower used to be and the fruit was. You can see how many fruits the bird is eating, and all that seed will be eventually dispersed through defecation. Now, there are chilies of five, as I was mentioning, 5 different species. Perhaps the king of chilies is Capsicum annum, which comes from central Mexico. It was domesticated by the central Mexican farmers way before the Aztec Empire was formed. In the early formative period, the first settlers and the first starters of agriculture in central Mexico started domesticating chilies. And it has an incredible variation in life and shapes and fieriness in the amount of capsaicin. There are 2 other chilies that come mostly from the Caribbean. One is Capsicum chinense. This was a mistake by Linnaeus, as a matter of fact. Linnaeus received the chili and he classified it as Capsicum chinense because he thought that the specimen he had received came from China. Actually, the plant is not chinense, it's in the worst cases Caribbean. It was widely cultivated throughout the Caribbean islands and part of the Yucatan Peninsula when the Europeans arrived to the Americas. And then this really interesting plant that grows all along the Atlantic from Brazil, from the area of Rio de Janeiro, all the way along the Atlantic coast to Louisiana, which is Capsicum frutescens. And this is the chili that is used in Tabasco pepper. That's what it gives the Tabasco pepper a really, really interesting taste, quite different from the normal Mexican chili or from the Antillean, the Caribbean chili, Capsicum chinense. It has, as the name suggests, frutescence. It has a fruity taste. It has a certain aroma to it that is very enticing and very nice. And then there are 2 species of chilies from South America. The most common is Capsicum baccatum, all over South America. Like Capsicum annum, it was domesticated by the Andean peasants in South America, and it reached its heyday with the Aztec, with Quechua, with the Inca Empire, and it has a huge variation in shapes and sizes. They're all known collectively as ají, A-J-I. And then there's this one, which is very interesting, very easy to recognize. It has different varieties as yellow and red. Capsicum pubescens also comes from the Andes. Although when the Europeans arrived to Europe, it had already reached Mexico. When the Europeans arrived to the American continent, it had already reached Mexico, but its center of origin is really Peru and Bolivia. And it has dark, dark black seeds. It's the only chili that has densely black seeds. All the other chilies have mostly white seeds. Capsicum pubescens, known as manzano, apple chili, or also as rocoto, R-O-C-O-T-O. And of course, the importance of chilies cannot be minimized. As a matter of fact, the eating chili has taken off in the last century. Until not many centuries ago, it was considered only something that some cultures in Asia and of course in the Americas ate. But now more and more the United States and Europe are consuming huge amounts of chili and becoming prime chili eaters. Okay, I will stop here. Some California plants that you might see is Datura wrighti, known as tolhuache, also as jimson weed. This plant is very toxic. I don't really recommend that you try it. Also, it can be hallucinogenic. The problem with this plant is the hallucinogenic dose is very close to the toxic dose. And that's the reason why I really don't recommend you even try eating it, because it's very, very easy to get a one-way ticket. It's very common around Riverside, all over the mountains in Riverside. I think I will stop there. Next week I'll see others. I've been way beyond my time. I'm going to stop here, and next Wednesday, the 22nd, I'll finish the potato family, and we'll move into the other family. Sorry for taking so long with the potato family, but as I hope I have convinced you, it's an incredibly important and extremely fascinating family in more than one way. A family of plants that are highly toxic, and at the same time we have incorporated them into some of the best parts of our cuisine. Just imagine what would food in the United States or Northern Europe be without the potato? What would food in the Mediterranean and in southern Spain, especially in Italy, without the tomato? And what would food be in the world without the consumption of one of the many varieties of chilies? So thank you very much. And this is the end of this talk. I'll see you again next Wednesday.